Hello, welcome to Get Your Mind On. I'm Lori Stohs. Last week we talked a little bit about transitions, the transitions that come up in our life that we have to deal with. I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into transition today and think about what does it mean for you and how do you deal with that. So we're going to spend some time first on, remember I talked about planned and unplanned transitions. We're going to really focus on the planned transitions today and thinking about the choices that we have with that transition and how we go about that transition in those phases. So when you think about the transition, first I want you to think about why. Why are you going through the transition? So is it something when you think about you have control over and maybe you're not happy in the role that you're in? How many people have those jobs that they're not happy in? I know many of you are probably shaking your heads going, yeah, some days it's great, some days it's really not. Yeah, I'd like to get out of here. So when we think about that transition, I want you to dig deep to understand why are you going through this transition or why do you want to transition? That same piece may apply to a relationship. Maybe you're in a relationship that has been a little bit difficult and challenging for you, and you've gone back and forth. Do I stay or do I go? That's a common one as well. And we know that drives a lot of our deeper happiness, but we really have to understand at the end of the day, what's the why? What's the reason that's deeper? Sometimes there's just little noise around us that's distracting, right? So let's go back to the job scenario. Maybe you just have an employee that drives you crazy or your manager isn't great. What really is the reason why you want to make that transition? I think that's very important because sometimes, and we may all raise our hands and said we did it, or you may know of somebody who sometimes just goes and jumps quickly because they don't want to deal with things. So they'll just say, I just want to change. So I don't like it, so I just want to change something else. I just want to change something else. Well, that doesn't ever really, at the end of the day, deal with the deep problem, the root cause of why we want the change. So I think it's important to think about the why underneath it. The next piece to think about is I want you to think about there's really 3 phases of transition. So remember last week I had you look and think about what are some of the transitions you've been through, maybe that have been successful. There's 3 phases. One is the pre-phase. So all of that thinking and planning before the transition actually takes place. Again, this is when we can make the choice that that's going to happen. Second is actually when you're going through the transition. And third is post-transition. So there's those 3 phases that I really want you to think about. Some of us need a lot of time in the very beginning to think about what is the change I want to make and that I want to have everything detail-oriented and planned. So some of you may be very strong about takes you a little longer to think about change. So you want to have all your I's dotted and T's crossed before you go through the change and say, this is exactly what I want to do, how I'm going to do it in the timeline. There may be some of you on that front end of the change. It's like, I need to do it. I got to go and move quickly right through the change. Okay. And so when you think about that front end, and some of you may just totally procrastinate and be totally solemn and procrastinate forever and ever and ever because you know you need to make changes. Just so difficult. So I want you to think about that front end of the change and think about before you launch into change, what is your style of that? Second piece is actually when you're in it, that execution of the change. Again, part of that is the timeline, part of it is how quickly it is. A lot of that has to do with your attitude around the change. Is it something you're excited about? Okay, so when you're thinking about changing that job, sometimes when you're actually in it and moving through it, it's really good. Let's use another example of moving into a new home. You have something excited to look forward to, right? So sometimes that piece, of course, not all change is positive or negative, right? I mean, it just depends on what it is for you. If you move into a new home, well, if you built a new home and it's your dream home, you're going to be very excited about it. So that execution is going to be very quickly. If it's something that you're forced into another home because of a relationship issue or divorce or separation, obviously moving into that next home isn't as exciting. So then really there's that phase of when you're in it. So when you're in it, how do you respond to it? How do you execute on that happening? Then the final stage is that post transition. Sometimes this is the hardest piece. All this activity, again, remember you've probably heard me say we're sometimes human doings instead of human beings. And when we're doing, guess what? We tuck. We're busy. We don't feel the emotions. It is what it is, right? We're moving very quickly. Then all of a sudden, you're there. You're in that new job. You're in that different house, whatever it might be. And all the things that maybe you thought it was going to be isn't there. Or all of a sudden now you're feeling some of those emotions that maybe you weren't feeling because you were too busy. Things quiet down, right? So I look at me for the transition with my children leaving and going to college and becoming an empty nester. Huge transition for me. I'm excited about it. I'm very excited about what they're going to have their lives to be. I'm excited about my next phase of life. But I know that once the house is empty, the shoes aren't sitting in the entryway, and the stuff isn't all around that sometimes drives me crazy, I know that those are going to be hard times, that there's going to be some moments that are going to be difficult for me because now it's settled. So we really have to look at those 3 phases of transition and think about them and be real and be able to evaluate them. And then most of all, I want you to really think about is honoring them. Honoring where you are, honoring what's going on, honoring your feelings as you go through that transition. So when we think about that, that's really, really critical for us to do. And again, depending on the situation, the scenario, and where you're at in the phase, I really want you to think about your personality, because you may ask all your friends and all those people around you to be able to support you, but it might be difficult because you have to think about how you do it. So for positive charge this week, I want you first to think about, if you're in a transition, why? Why are you in that transition and what does it mean to you? Second, think about those phases of transition and think about how you respond to each of those phases. Again, transition and change is part of our life. It's always going to be there for us, and we really need to dig deep and understand it. Otherwise, our road will be rocky. There's going to be rocky times through our journey that comes along the way. But really, if we understand how we approach it, how we deal with it, we can prepare better for it and make it more successful for us. Thanks for joining us today, and remember to get your mind on.